David Johnson is a packaging engineer and Hasbro insider for Project Veritas. This is an awesome episode. We dive into his journey from Project Veritas to Freedom Fest, where we first met, and why he's moved from Portland, Oregon to Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Before all that, he graduated from Rochester Institute of Technology with a background in CAD and engineering design. He then entered the public light after bravely exposing the critical race theory ideology being pushed at Hasbro by a contractor called Conscious Kid, which believes that babies can be racist and that 5-year-old kids can be just as racist as their parents. In this interview, we talk about his hero's journey, his convictions, his concerns about Marxism, why he has left the left for liberty, and why he's left the church while holding on to Christian values. David is liberty-minded and politically independent and motivated to do his part to save this country. He's writing a book on the progressive movement's subversion of American values, which he hopes will be a handbook of sorts to navigate the crazy Kafka traps many of us are facing from the loudest of the left wing. I'm Sienna Mae Heath, and this is Leaving the Left for Liberty. Welcome to my podcast, David Johnson.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Glad we got those technical difficulties sorted.
Yeah, thank you. So we met at Freedom Fest, and you've had quite the journey from Hasbro to Project Veritas to Freedom Fest, and also moving from Portland to South Dakota. How are you holding up?
I'm holding up pretty good. It has been quite the past few months. I can't say I ever really expected any of this to happen, but this is my life now, so I'm just kind of rolling with it and see where this path goes.
I'm happy for you. Yeah. So I've really been digging deep into your story and reflecting on your panel at Freedom Fest with Project Veritas. And when you went to Project Veritas, you spoke your conscience. And I found that to be incredibly brave. And you said something that really resonated with me. I hope you don't mind. I'm just going to quote you for a second.
No, go ahead.
You said, "This isn't something I wanted to do. This is something I felt I had to do." Tell me more about that feeling, how it built up and how it finally burst.
Sure. So to give you some more background on that statement, so I've been kind of aware and following, I guess you could say, intersectional ideology for years now. Not really something I sought out, but it was just something I saw affecting the things that I cared about. I saw it was in the media I enjoy. I saw it in the video games I wanted to play, and just I kept seeing it more and more throughout our society, and it frustrated me because it doesn't align with a lot of the values that I have and a lot of the values that I grew up with. So when I was at Hasbro, and then to have that pushed into my face in a setting where they're saying, we want you as the engineer to kind of push this ideology that you don't agree with onto children and onto families. For me, that was the final straw. And I'm like, this is kind of the moment where it's like, all right, if I don't say anything, then I don't really have a right to ever criticize this again, because I forego the opportunity to resist it. And that was kind of my thought process when I originally recorded the meeting I was in, and then I sent it to Veritas. I didn't expect all of this to blow up the way it did, but in the moment, it was just kind of, I felt this was the right thing to do, and I just kind of felt that people have to see what's happening.
Yeah, and I recall it was a very covert push of critical race theory at Hasbro, and it was through branding and messaging, and it was happening through meetings through what you've described as overtly discriminatory language. So it was this covert push, but this like very overt language that didn't sit well with you. So what specific language were they using, and what did it imply?
Well, the meeting itself was pretty direct. Like one of the slides is children at about, I believe, 6 months are going to start displaying overt racial biases, and they start to make the distinction between the white children are going to have these behaviors and they're going to treat the non-white children in this other way. And just I just don't see how they could expect us to push that, because it's not true that children have inherent racial biases unless they're taught that. And the ideology that they want us to push is going to teach more children to harbor racial biases, and I oppose that 100%. I refuse to play a hand in teaching children to be racist. That is something that people I looked up to growing up, like Martin Luther King, opposed that. That was the entire point of the civil rights era, to make sure that his children and his children's children weren't judged on their skin, but by their actions. So that was why I just had such a strong disconnect with that ideology, and why I still do oppose it, and I will continue to.
Yeah, well said. What we're seeing is a far cry from Dr. King's dream.
It's the complete opposite. It's such a shame, and I'm not sure if it's pushed by people who consciously understand that it opposes all the progress that America's fought for, but the end result is still going to be, not only are they going to bring back racial discrimination, not actually no, they're going to bring back not only racial discrimination, but also sexual discrimination and gender, but they're going to bring it back in a way that the ideals that all men are created equal aren't going to matter, because their ideology opposes that and its core.
Yeah, I hear you. So were you saying that they were targeting kids, or rather babies, as young as 6 months?
Yeah, so the point, the goal, I guess you could say, of what the Conscious Kid was trying to push at Hasbro was they wanted to use marketing, packaging, and product design to push critical theory onto children, and then through the children, the parents would also kind of pick up on that ideology, because they're like, oh, well, my child's saying this, and I don't know where this idea comes from, but it sounds good on the surface, like anti-racism. Oh, that can't be too bad. So that's the goal, to push it into children who don't understand these concepts yet, the children who are still trying to understand just how to relate with the other children around them, but to get it so that when they do start relating to other children, that it's done through the lens of race and gender ideology.
Hmm. Yeah, and Conscious Kid was the contractor that Hasbro was working with, right? Okay.
Yeah,
What
there.
other
Oh,
companies
sorry.
sorry, no, sorry, I'm just curious, like what other companies does Conscious Kid work with? Do you know?
I don't know their full scope of who they're connected with, but they're not a small company, which is very odd, because to get a contract position at Hasbro, like Hasbro is a major company by themselves, but also their partners are Nickelodeon, the NFL, and they partner with YouTube as well. And YouTube by itself is almost I guess you could say, has a monopoly on online communications, and just like those are huge partners. And then Nickelodeon as well, that's something I grew up with. Like they're an institution for children's entertainment, so they have massive reach, and I'm not quite sure how that's possible.
Yeah, that's very curious. And also, I recall 2-year-old children, according to Conscious Kid, 2-year-old children could be racist, and
Yeah.
5-year-old children can be just as racist as their parents, implying that their white parents are also racist.
Yep,
So,
it's that slow like it starts off like, oh, when they're young, they're just gonna have slight biases, but then as soon as they're six, they're going to be as racist as the parents. And it's just that slow subversion of like, now if you accept that premise, you're accepting that the parents are racist and the children are racist, because you bought into that framework, and it's not true.
hmm. So how can this approach negatively impact children of all races?
I think it's going to negatively impact children in quite a few ways. Excuse me. I think the first thing is going to be, you're going to see an increase in racial tensions between groups, because the white children are going to be, they're going to they're taught to view themselves as the oppressors. So no matter what they're going to do, they're going to be oppressing the other children who are not white. and it's just going to create animosity between those two groups. The secondary side effect, I think, is going to be kind of a demoralization of all children. Because I think when you have that kind of animus between groups, you're going to end up stifling communication and connections between them. So we're not going to have as much, I guess, creativity and just kind of open expression, because everyone's going to be walking on these eggshells because you don't want to offend one group or be seen as the one offending everyone else. And then I think those are going to be the two main side effects that we see of this ideology. There will be further ramifications as these children then grow older, and then they're going to think that this is just the way things are, and then and they're going to perpetuate that same idea onto their children as well. And it's just going to create a cycle where people are teaching each other to discriminate based on race while they're trying to not be racist. And it's not going to work.
Yeah, it's a toxic cycle. And it's very sad and it's such a shame. I will say what brings me hope in these times is I know kids love to rebel and they love to ask questions. So how soon do you think some kids might rebel and what might that look like?
I'm not sure because I don't have kids myself. I'm only 25, but I think maybe when kids start hitting, probably I would guess the middle school ages. I think a lot of them are going to be sick and tired of being told you're wrong because of your skin color, or you're held back because of your skin color. And I think a lot of people are just going to start saying, you know what? No, that's not true. I can do what I want, and how dare you tell me I have to be a certain way, or how dare you say I'm bad because I happen to be born this way. No, I don't have to believe in that. So I hope that's going to be kind of that rebellious attitude that we see. I'd guess middle school ages, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I hope so too. Why do you think companies like Conscious Kid do not want a colorblind world? Or is that a fair question even? Do
No,
they?
I think that's a great question actually. And I can answer it now because since I've come out as the Hasbro insider, I've been reading into a lot of the core reading of critical race theory and critical gender theory. Um, to quote How to Be an Anti-Racist from Ibram X. Kendi's book, the reason they don't want colorblindness is because they see the greatest threat to equity is not the it, I want to get this quote right. The greatest threat to what they consider the black identity is not it's not the Ku Klux Klan. It's not America's history of racism, but it's actually colorblindness. And the reason for that is if people are colorblind racially and that they're not judging each other based on race, then you can't come back and say, well, all of this inequity is because of discrimination. And if it's not because of discrimination, then there's no argument to come back and say, well, we need to start discriminating and we need to start treating people differently to make sure we get equal outcome. And that's the goal of critical theory, is equal outcome between all identity groups. But they can only do that if they can claim the inequity is because of discrimination.
Okay, got it. Got it. And maybe you've already expressed this, but what is the most troubling part of this ideology to you? And what do you think is so alluring about it to so many people?
I think the most troubling part is the fact that it's intentionally manipulative. For example, the term anti-racism itself, to most people, that's just going to come across as someone who doesn't want to be racist, because most people don't like racist people. Most people don't want to discriminate, but to be anti-racist, like the actual term, is to encourage discrimination to achieve an equal outcome or whatever the desired outcome is. And the problem with that is it makes it very difficult for a lot of people to argue against it, because it's so easy for them to say, well, if you oppose us, you must be racist because we're anti-racist. And it's a manipulative linguistic trap. So I think that's the most pernicious part about their ideology. And then the consequences, I don't think a lot of people understand how bad the consequences of this ideology will be. Like, I don't think there will be a race war, but they're really pushing for it if they continue down this road. And it's not even going to be along racial lines. It's just going to be along ideological lines. It's going to be those who support critical theory, critical race theory, or critical gender theory, and then those who oppose it. And I don't want any kind of conflict like that in this country, but it seems to be kind of speeding up, and critical theories infected a lot of other countries as well. So it's just we've kind of seen that around the Western world in the past, I'd say, few years, 5 years.
Yeah, it's been creeping in. And I I'm observing. I think people fall into the victim mindset and perhaps even the abuser mindset really easily. And it's kind of an addictive cycle. Do you think that that's what's so almost attractive or alluring or captivating about this ideology, is being able to settle into those roles and have it be almost morally upright to do so?
I think there's some validity to that. That when people can identify as a victim, it makes it really easy for them to say the problems that I'm having in my life are not my fault. They're not a result of my choices. It's actually the system, or it's institutional racism or institutional sexism. So it kind of maybe relieves a lot of personal responsibility that maybe a lot of people aren't ready to have or don't want to have. They want like an easy solution. And that I've kind of thought about that might be a consequence of just this generation, including my generation, is just used to having just immediate gratification for everything, just because we have the internet. We live in the age of communications where everything just happens so fast. And I think a consequence of that is a lot of people don't necessarily, how do I put this, put in the time to consider how what they're doing, what their choices are, will affect them in the long term. And if they're making bad decisions, then they're going to have bad consequences. But if they can off put that and say, well, it's not my fault, it's just the result of all these other things around me, and if I can destroy that, then my life will be perfect, then it kind of gives them an out. And also it fosters like this group mentality, because you have a lot of people who believe the same thing, that are saying, well, it's not my fault, well, it's this institution that affects all of us, so if we work together as a group, then we can destroy these institutions, and then we'll have whatever they think their utopian ideal is, equity generally. And it's not a achievable outcome from what they're pushing, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah, and I want to also get back to what was happening at Hasbro, because Hasbro, as perhaps any organization or school or institution, is a microcosm of what's happening in the world, right? So one of like the common rebuttals I noticed at Hasbro and kind of just in general is, well, we're not seeing a wide range of cultures represented in our products. Therefore, we need anti-racism to solve that. So was there a wide range of cultures, or is there a wide range of cultures represented in Hasbro's toys? And why does this matter to you, or why does it not matter to you?
Um, I think I think Hasbro has a pretty, I guess, up to use the term, diverse selection of toys. Like, I grew up playing with Hasbro toys, and so did a lot of my friends. And I'm from upstate New York, where there's people from all kinds of backgrounds and ethnicities. So I don't think any one toy is just represented or relegated to one culture. Like, I I guess I don't see how the argument that Hasbro and other companies saying that just we need more cultural representation automatically equates to pushing anti-racism. But what happens is it kind of creates this like tokenist mentality that, like, if we're pushing something that claims to be for, say, black people, then we're automatically representing the interest of that group. And races aren't groups. Like the black community isn't necessarily a thing. There are communities of black people, just like there are communities of white people or Hispanic people, but those communities are generally centered around like similar interests and similar lifestyles as opposed to just we look the same. And that's kind of the problem with anti-racism and critical theory in general. It just assumes that all people of a demographic, of a racial demographic, are the same, and they're just not. That's typically we've looked back at that and say, all right, people who say all races think one thing are racist people. But now that's okay if you call it anti-racism.
Yeah, it's an upside down world.
Definitely clown world.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And before you blew the whistle on what was happening at Hasbro, and you were in these training seminars, were they mandatory?
It was just the one meeting that I recorded. It was mandatory for me because any meeting in my calendar is mandatory. Hasbro did make a comment that it wasn't mandatory for all employees, and that's true. Looking back at the tape, there was, I think, a peak of 75 people in there, but you don't need to have all of your employees in a meeting. If you have product design, marketing, and packaging, that's all you really need to push ideas onto people because those are your core manufacturing circles. Like they're the people making the decisions about how the product's going to look and how we're going to present it to people.
Yes, and you were a packing engineer. So what was your role in all of this?
So a packaging engineer, my role was the like design the boxes and the I guess you could say the shipping requirements to make sure that things aren't broken in transport, to make sure that they're going to fit on a store shelf, and to make sure that all the components are going to be able to fit in a package without getting broken. So just general things like that.
Okay. Yeah. Hmm. And when you attended that seminar or after you attended it, did you try to interact and ask questions and maybe like kind of poke the bear?
I didn't. I thought about it. At the end of that meeting that I was in, there was like a Q&A, but the end of it was just people kind of just clapping and saying, "Thanks for bringing this to my attention." Just kind of, I don't even know if it was genuine support, but it's just kind of, "Oh, thanks for this meeting. It was a great presentation. You did good." Just kind of general things like that. And there were C-level people in this meeting, and I was just a contractor, so I didn't really feel I was in a position to really step up and say, "Hey, executives, I don't like this," because I'm not typically that kind of person. Um, so I didn't end up doing anything like that internally at the company.
Yeah, yeah, I understand. You know what's really interesting is as I interview whistleblowers and other alternative voices, especially in this time, I find many of you are actually kind of on the shy side, and like I'm on the shy side too. So like I was actually just talking to a friend about this series, and the refrain in our conversation was, "It's always the quiet ones."
It's true. There might be something to that because just maybe because we're quiet, we're just like we have issues with things that we just don't bring them up normally until there's something that kind of it's like the last straw. And this was the last straw for me. And I've spoken with some of the other whistleblowers too at Veritas. A lot of just quiet people, just kind of shy, reserved normally until there's just that one thing where they're like, I will not stand for this. I will stand against it. And I guess I think it's good that we're just seeing more and more people like that. Even shy people like me are standing up and saying no to a lot of this.
Yeah, yeah, it's really incredible. And I wonder if this is a new phenomenon. I'm just a few years older than you, so I'm like, when I talk about history, I kind of have to check myself. But I feel like I wonder if it's a new phenomenon that like the whistleblowers and dissidents of our time are actually the quiet types who have just reached their breaking point, or is this something that's like a phenomenon that we've seen time and time again, where the people who are like considered like really brave and outspoken in the history books are actually like the quiet people of their generation who just lost it in a moment.
Yeah, it kind of makes you think back. Just like how much of this is actually the way it's portrayed in history books. That's a good point. It definitely seems like it's, I don't want to call it an uprising of the meek because that doesn't sound great, but shy people are just standing up more and more, and I think that encourages other people who aren't like just normally outspoken to be like, you know what, I can do that too. I think there's
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
real value in that because at least in my experience, most people are kind of shy, at least in the circles I hang with.
Yeah. Yeah. And many of you guys like are kind of creative in some way. I find like whether it's like, in the mind or more visually or like, in tactile ways, like we just, I don't know, it's a very interesting time. And I think it's also a time of like really grappling with morality and ethics, like you were talking about how kids, the next generation might become demoralized. So why is it immoral or just plain wrong for anyone to be treated like a victim or as an abuser?
I think it's morally wrong because you put roadblocks, like I guess mental roadblocks in people's heads that if you're the abuser, then you're telling them no matter what you do, no matter how virtuous or how selfless of a person you may be, because you were born a certain way, you need to always feel bad about it and apologize. And I think that's a horrible mentality to trap somebody in. And on the flip side of that, I think it's just as horrible to tell somebody, hey, because you were born a certain way, you're not going to succeed. No matter what you do, no matter how hard you work, there are systemic barriers in your way that'll keep you down forever. And I think that same thing is just going to it's going to teach people that, well, if I can't succeed anyway, then why bother, why try? And it's just going to lead to, I think, a creative dark ages, both for the entertain for art and entertainment, but also for math and sciences, because people just aren't going to be incentivized to try because they're just going to see it as, well, what's the point? I'm either going to be held back because of who I was, or I'm going to be held back because of what I was born as, or I'm always going to be stepping on other people because I am an oppressor. And both of those are equally terrible mindsets to trap people in.
Yeah. Yeah. And what has been your journey politically and ideologically? Did you ever believe in this oppressor mindset, or like not for a second?
I've heard it growing up from different people, but my core value since I've been young has always been freedom. I've always wanted to be free to live as I saw fit. Um, and that's probably a result of the media that I consumed as a kid and still do now. But I've always believed that hard work will get you far. It might not get you exactly where you want to go, but if you work hard at something, eventually you will make progress. You will succeed in some way. And I've always believed in that. So when I hear the critical theorists and the anti-racists come around telling people you're not going to succeed because of systemic barriers, no matter what, I just look at them and say, you just haven't tried hard enough. Or if you just changed your mentality a little bit and saw that actually there are plenty of opportunities for all people, then you probably wouldn't feel that way. So
Hmm,
I've never bought into the critical theory ideology, not even a little bit.
cool. Yeah, and you'd mentioned to me on the phone that you were kind of like center left before a lot of this political tension. What has been your journey since then? Have you moved right, or just like some other mysterious place on the political spectrum?
I think I've moved maybe a little more towards the center. I'd say originally I was just kind of default left wing. I still think I'm left, but because I believe in things like I like social safety nets. I think that is good for a developed society. But I also think having a big government is a problem. Um, I I've always been about individual freedom and liberty, and I still very much am. And to me, growing up, those were left-wing values. But our culture right now, America, even Europe and Canada, they're so far left. to the point where we have politicians debating whether we should have borders or not, whether we should be indoctrinating children, and just a lot of very, I guess, radical opinions that makes me kind of consider like 10 years ago, I would have been considered just center left, but in the current age, I guess right. It may be center right. I'm still pretty centrist in my beliefs. I want people to be able to live to the best of their potential and be left alone by the government or large corporations. So wherever that falls is where my politics are.
Yeah, yeah, fair enough. I hear you. So, when you spoke your conscience to Project Veritas, what happened next and how were some of your personal relationships affected?
When I originally did the Insider video, a lot of my friends were just kind of amazed. They were just like, "You did not do that." So I sent some of them pictures, and they're like, "This happened," and a lot of my close friends were really just kind of impressed because a lot of them have similar frustrations to what I have. They're sick of seeing critical theory. They're sick of seeing the increased tensions that is just being egged on by some certain people pushing a very fringe ideology in our country. So I got a lot of support from friends. I had some critique from family members who were less than happy. Not so much because they support critical theory, but just a lot of I think a lot of people who don't pay attention to politics or more importantly, culture don't understand these issues. And it's kind of a smear to come out against, I guess, what we could call establishment ideals. So I got some reprimand for that. I did lose some friends, um, but overall, just kind of more support than anything. And I don't regret what I did at all, not even for a second. If I could go back, I'd do it everything the same way. Um, so that's just been kind of the difference in my personal life. I got out of Portland, which I'm sure you've heard about Portland in the news over the past year and a half. It's a great place to look at. Don't visit. Um, and I just kind of left that kind of culture because Portland's a very, very left wing area, far left actually. And not being immersed in that is kind of freeing now that I live out in the Midwest.
Yeah, that's awesome. What's something that you observed or experienced in Portland that maybe didn't make the news?
Um, I mean, I have seen riots. I've seen a lot of riots happen in Portland. If you go downtown, actually, before I left, I went around town and just took video, not so much of any specific activity, but I just took pictures and video of just what Portland looks like day to day. It's a disgusting city. There are needles and trash. There's needles and trash. There's homeless encampments on every corner. There's tents and it's not a good place to be. And I don't think a lot of that goes into the news because a lot of people would probably feel very negatively about just how that city has been allowed to deteriorate. And I'm sure it's not just Portland. Like I think Los Angeles is in a very similar, if not worse state, but it's just not things that people hear about because the local news won't report on it because they'll know people will view it badly.
Yeah, yeah, they would. What was your breaking point in deciding to move to South Dakota?
The Veritas thing was kind of a big instigator for me to get out of Portland, but just seeing the continued riots. I used to love going to downtown Portland when I first moved there. There's so many shops. There was food carts, or there would be just a block of food carts of independent sellers, and you could find so many unique things that you might not find anywhere else. But after 2020 there's really just no draw. There's more chance of me getting randomly attacked downtown, not even for being someone who's right wing or just politically aware, but just there's just so much random violence that it's not a good place to live. So 2020 was definitely the wake up call for me to just be like, I'm getting out of the city.
Yeah. Yeah. And how far are you from Rapid City?
From Rapid City, 6 hours from there. I live closer to the Sioux Falls area now.
Cool. Cool. And you moved after Freedom Fest, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So how did you end up choosing Sioux Falls?
I had a friend who was from South Dakota originally, this area, who always talked it up. But after Freedom Fest, because I'd never been to South Dakota. It's one of those states where like I knew about it, but I didn't know anything that actually happened. I didn't know what the culture was like. But when I visited for Freedom Fest, the thing that struck me was just how friendly and open everyone was. People greet you when they pass. They say hi. They'll ask how you're doing. They'll shake your hand. It's really refreshing. You don't get any of that in New York or Portland. And the kind of just openness for people to be patriotic and just be confident in what they believe in was a real refreshing thing for me to experience when I visited for Freedom Fest. Because I've always heard that like this is the Bible Belt, so people are going to be really judgmental and uptight and strict, and that's not true at all. People here don't care about much. They just want you to be friendly. They want you to just kind of respect their community and just be a normal person, and it's really refreshing. And I like that I can walk down the street and I'll see American flags proudly displayed. Like that's a good feeling. The people that are here like this country.
Hmm. Yeah, it is refreshing. I loved that week at Freedom Fest. What was your experience like at the festival and speaking on a panel?
There's that entire like month is kind of a blur for me. It was I had a blast, like just because Freedom Fest was right after Turning Point, which was in Florida. So I came from Florida, which I had never visited, to South Dakota, which I had also never visited. So I was just spending a lot of time with the Veritas crew and then doing interviews with like Hannity and Alex Jones, and just a lot of people who I've seen but just never dreamed that I'd be able to speak to in person or even through video. So the whole experience for me was just kind of surreal, and it was nice to be able to just speak about the things that have been bothering me for so long and have people actually receptive to not only what I'm saying, but actually agree and be like, you've explained what I've been feeling well. Thank you. Never experienced something like that before, but it was a great feeling, and I really enjoyed it. Definitely would like to go back to another Freedom Fest event or Turning Point.
Yeah, it was such a relief to be there at Freedom Fest and have people like affirm your values and your concerns. And it's always also like a relief when someone can put into words what you've been feeling or what you've been thinking. So I'm grateful that you're continuing to speak out and to travel when you can to these events.
Yeah, definitely want to do more of it. I think it's the way I see it is the more people who understand what these problems are in our country, not even just critical theory, but just the other issues that some of the other whistleblowers have brought up, just like the corruption in our media institutions. Just the more people who understand these issues from not a biased news source, I think it makes it a lot easier for people to understand. And then if people are armed with that knowledge, then they can actually do something to change it. And I think that's a goal that's I'm going to keep working towards.
Yeah, it sounds like professionally you've really taken a turn. Are you still going to be an engineer of any sort?
I want to. I've been looking for new work as an engineer still because I got into engineering because I do have a passion for it. But at the same time, I'm still writing a book. I'm having a lot of fun with that, and I'm going to keep doing more interviews like this one and just try to keep getting the word out about the issues that I have a problem with and helping people understand them.
Yeah, yeah. Tell me more about your book.
So it's very much in the rough stages, but I want to create a book that clearly defines what critical race theory is and critical theory and anti-racism is to the average person who's not following culture war videos constantly like I have been, and just arm them with knowledge to clearly understand these ideas so they can refute them wherever they encounter them, whether it's at work or in their personal lives, that they can be like, all right, I've heard this. I know what you're trying to do, and here's why it's wrong, and I'm not going to stand for it.
It sounds like a handbook almost.
That's kind of what I'm going for. Yeah. Just like a quick guide of how to understand. Because
Yeah, like
I'm an engineer. That's kind of what I'm used to, just like quick guide, a book of how to break this down to understand it and then construct it back differently. So that's what I'm trying to build.
yeah, I was thinking that engineering is quite like a boundaried, systematic job. And then writing, I mean, I think even when you're writing something that is quite structured like you are, writing is a more fluid task. So how do you compare your experiences in engineering with your experiences in writing?
Um, they're definitely different. For like engineering is more rooted in math and science and like things that can be measured and calculated, whereas writing is a lot more free form. But me personally, I've always been more of a creative person. Actually, one of the reasons I studied packaging is it's a fusion between engineering and kind of creative arts, because a lot of design is just you're conceptualizing, you're brainstorming, and then you have to work out a way to get this idea you have into a physical medium that can actually work and be proven to work over time. So that's kind of where I see the intersection of it. But I really enjoy creative things, and I think it's good to start building culture that reflects traditional American values. And I say that not as someone who's a conservative. I'm not conservative at all. I'm quite classically liberal, I guess you could say. But I think one of the reasons we're having such problems in our country is because our culture has been subverted, through books, through media, through entertainment. And I think it's really important to kind of, I don't want to say build back. It's important to restore the values that this country was founded in, because I think they are good values, and I think it's important to kind of teach those on to other people.
Hmm. Yeah, I think many people would agree that the progressive movement has subverted a lot of our culture and a lot of our peace, perhaps in the crusade for justice, which kind of borders on revenge sometimes.
It does, doesn't it? It feels like they're out for revenge, but it's revenge for what? Because a lot of these people, especially if you look at the mugshots that Andy No puts up for some of these people who are arrested, they are the most miserable looking people you will ever see. But they come from areas, and a lot of them come from areas and backgrounds that are extremely comfortable and affluent. So it's like, what are you seeking revenge for? Like your life can't be that bad that you just seek to burn down buildings. And I've worked in like soup kitchens. I've helped homeless people who have more gratitude and kindness in their hearts than a lot of these people do.
Hmm. Yeah, Andy No comes out with some really incredible work. He just put out a book, and I follow his journalism around like Antifa and like the forming of Antifa and the kinds of people that join and why and how they might target people who are like very sensitive and downtrodden and looking for purpose. What do you know about that? And like, what have you observed in Portland when you were living there?
Um, Andy is doing a great job. A lot of the people that Antifa does recruit are people who just kind of they're aimless, I guess you could say. They don't really know what to do with their lives, and I think people need meaning. That's something that Jordan Peterson's brought up in his works as well. There's a crisis of meaning in this generation, and I've experienced that a bit in my own personal life. But it's these groups kind of prey on people who want to help. I think a lot of them genuinely do want to help other people or want to help their their society, but these groups manipulate them into being useful pawns for radical ideologies to the point where they get people to go attack random random people in the streets. Like there was a woman in Portland who said that Antifa lobbed fireworks at her and her children.
Mm.
And Antifa are the people who go around spray painting Black Lives Matter onto every building in Portland, but they're going to throw fireworks at a black family? Like, who do you think you're helping? But they're just so they're caught up in their warped ideology that it just doesn't matter because they view it that they're doing it for the greater good. They're doing it to help the cause. And the problem with that is the cause is always above people's lives. And that's where the issue is.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really scary. And you had talked about earlier like the consequences of this ideology, and people don't necessarily take it seriously. I think even people who might be concerned are like not, I feel like they're not as concerned as they should be. And maybe if they lived in Portland, they would be sticking their necks out like you have.
Yeah, I think a lot of people kind of view the Antifa groups and the Black Lives Matter rioters. A lot of them just dismiss them like, oh, they're just people, I guess, cosplaying as revolutionaries. Like they're just a bunch of gangs. Like they're not causing any real harm. And I think that's because a lot of people don't see the actual devastation that they leave in their wake. And that's kind of why I went around Portland on my last day to just get pictures and videos because people see the things that Andy No posts. They'll see the riots and they'll see people throwing firebombs, which is awful. But what you don't see is the next day, all these buildings have plywood instead of windows, or there's burnt remains of something on the sidewalk. And these are communities where people live and they have to go to work and they have to like let their children outside in these areas, and they're causing massive damage, and just a lot of people don't know about it because the news won't report on it. So it kind of downplays the severity, I would say.
Yeah. I'm resisting the urge to black pill the rest of our conversation and try to turn it toward the light. So I'm gonna do that as best as
Okay,
I
no, I
can.
don't mean to sound all negative. Like I think it's darkest before the dawn. So these people are a problem, but I think more and more people are waking up to the fact that like if this continues, we're gonna come to a point where it can't be repaired, or we're gonna come to a point of serious civil conflict. And I think a lot more people are starting to just stand up and oppose a lot of the actions of these groups. I think even today, a lot of the businesses in downtown Portland sent a letter to Mayor Wheeler to kind of get him to take action against these people because they're just destroying the city.
Good, good.
But there's hope. There's people standing up, the increasing amount of whistleblowers coming to organizations like Veritas. Like since I did my insider, I think there's been four new whistleblowers since then. And it just kind of goes back to what James has said. One becomes two, two becomes four, four becomes eight, and you keep that momentum going until you have an not well yeah an army of people who are ready to stand up for what they believe in and say we will defend our values, we will defend our community and our country, hopefully.
Yeah. And what are American values?
American values, the way I've always understood them, are individual liberty, meritocracy, and negative rights, specifically negative rights, not positive rights.
What are
And that's
negative?
something I'm going to explain more in my book. But negative rights, I guess you could say, are the God-given and inalienable rights. It's you have the right to life, you have the right to liberty, and you have the right to pursue your own happiness. And of course, you have the right to own private property. And I think those are kind of the fundamental values of this country. And a lot of um, the Marxist kind of ideologies that are permeating our country and other countries as well directly oppose these things.
Mm.
because they are the foundation of American values, and they kind of seek to destroy the country or the values of the country so then they can build what they want on top of it.
Mm. Yeah. And why are those rights called negative rights and not positive rights? Just help me out here.
Sure. So the way I would distinguish it is positive rights are things that are, I guess you could say, they're privileges that can be taken away. So, for example, a lot of people want to have healthcare as a human right. It could be a positive right in the sense that if you are harmed in your society, then they will provide you healthcare. But if you were, say, in a forest and you were injured, no one has an obligation to bring you medical care. No one has an obligation to care for you. But if you were by yourself, you have the right to live, you have the right to go where you want, and then you have the right to defend yourself and your property. So those are what I view as negative rights.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, and what I'm hearing is that like you haven't maybe quite left the left, but you have left the, the Marxist left. um,
Absolutely.
yeah. And it sounds like you've always valued freedom. And you make a good point that I think many classical liberals make. They make this point too, is that like I didn't really change that much. I always valued individual freedom and freedom of speech and all that. Like we I guess collectively like we have experienced a shift where anyone who is still standing up for these values is perhaps considered right wing, or as I like to say, like we are leaving the left for liberty. We're leaving the left for a third way or an infinite number of ways.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to put it. Yeah, I don't think politically I've changed all that much, but definitely I can look at, say, where the mainstream left position is, and they're gone. I can't even see how far left they are because there's no challenge to their ideas. Whereas I'm still firmly rooted in individual liberty. I just want people to be left alone. And I think that kind of goes back to we've kind of talked about this before, like the idea of the hero's journey, and a lot of the media I consumed as a kid, just the value of freedom, being able to be free from an oppressive government or just whatever tyranny, is the highest value to have, because then it lets people live as they want and live happily as they want to. And I don't see that value in modern left-wing politics. And I also see that value undermined in a lot of the media that they push, which is why I want to be a counter force to that.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think good art, honest art that embodies the hero's journey is really what we need right now. And also, like, just to add to like the American values, we've talked about your Christian faith. And as we all know, that the country is based in Judeo-Christian values. Tell me more about how your Christian upbringing has influenced the way you navigate the world.
Sure. So I'm not I'm not actually religious anymore, but when I was growing up, I did grow up in a Christian church. We went to church every Sunday. My grandmother hosted Bible study, so very religious upbringing. Um, and while I don't necessarily subscribe to it anymore, I think a lot of the values I still hold, like the golden rule, treat other people the way you want to be treated, I think is just fundamental to how humans need to exist with one another. Like you can't have a society where it's okay for one group of people to do something to others, but it's not okay for them to do it in return. Like that just it's going to lead to chaos. But aside from that, I think growing up with religious values kind of instilled with me, I guess, a sense of like what is right and wrong and just doing the right thing without expecting reward back. And kind of keeps me, I think it keeps me humble to a degree, because like I've said, I've worked in soup kitchens at my church. I've helped homeless people. I've donated clothes, and I don't negatively look back on that at all. I'm actually really happy that I grew up doing that because it taught me like there are people who genuinely need help, and here are ways to actually provide help to people. And I think a lot more people need to understand that. Just going on like Twitter and changing your profile picture, you're not actually helping anybody. And going around, say, downtown Portland throwing firebombs, you're also not helping people. But if you were to go to a soup kitchen, if you were to go to Habitat for Humanity and build something and actually provide service to people who genuinely need it, are ways to actually affect positive change in the world.
Mm. Yeah, that's beautiful. So you left the left for liberty. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely.
And it sounds
Liberty
like,
first and
oh, sorry.
foremost. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, you're good.
It sounds like you also left the church. Is that right?
Yeah, you could say that. I don't go to church. I don't pray. I'm not really religious anymore. Um, I think there's a God, but not in the sense that most people would say.
Hmm. So what prompted you to leave the church?
Um, it was kind of like a journey of self-discovery. So I guess not to play the identity politics game, but I'm gay and I couldn't reconcile that with the church. Not that I think there's anything wrong with people who are religious. I think it's actually good for a lot of people, but just me personally, I couldn't hold those two things at the same time. So it just kind of drifted me away from the church. But that was also around the time where I think YouTube atheism was really big, and I just kind of started getting more interested in philosophy and just kind of understanding where where values and ethics and morality come from, if not from a God. So that kind of just continued me away from the church, I guess you could say.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense that you would have that crisis of faith. Hmm. And what is it about Marxism that subverts any of these values, whether it be like, American values of liberty and so forth, or even like Judeo-Christian values that founded the country?
Um, to start with I guess the American values, Marxism prioritizes equal outcome above all else. And the reason that that is a direct opposition to American values because America is kind of founded on the idea that people get what they individually deserve. And if you take that to an economic standpoint, it kind of results in meritocracy. People who work hard or are clever or are smart are going to earn more than people who do not put in the effort or who are just not as smart or as talented. That is unfair, but that is life. But people generally accept that because you're getting what you deserve. And in a Marxist viewpoint, that's wrong because some people end up more than others, and they kind of view that because all people are, they kind of twist the value of all people are created equal into being all people should be equalized, which is wrong. And then on a kind of Judeo-Christian value, Marxism isn't opposed to using, I guess, violence in order to persuade its political opponents. And that's generally, in my upbringing, violence is not, it's not within the Christian or Catholic or just Judeo-Christian worldview. You're supposed to turn the other cheek. You're supposed to use nonviolence to persuade your enemies so that they're no longer your enemies in the long term. You want to turn your enemies into friends. Marxists just want to beat their enemies until they shut up.
Yeah, yeah, fair enough. Is there any value or validity to Marxism?
That's a good question. I think I'd have to study Marxism a bit more in depth before I could answer it. But I would say that the countries in history that have tried to get to equal outcome always, without fail, end up with a group of people at the top who are maintaining the system and a lot of poor, desperate, starving people. And I think that's because you can't equalize everyone at the top. It's not possible because if everyone's equal at the top, then they all get equal say, and not everyone's going to agree to live in a Marxist system. But you can equalize everyone at the bottom and keep them down there. And I think that that is the inevitable outcome of a Marxist system. It's always going to become totalitarian.
Hmm. Yeah, unfortunately so. And something else you said, I just kind of put a pin in it. You mentioned that there's really no Black America per se, but there are Black communities. Um, how would you define or quantify like different Black communities that you've seen? And does that make up any sort of Black America per se?
So yeah, there are black communities just because there are areas that are more racially, they have different how do I put this, distributions of demographics. So you're gonna have communities where they're just predominantly black people and they're gonna have shared values, not because they're black necessarily, but because they might come from similar, they might have similar ethnicities. So like in New York, there's communities where there's a large percentage of people who come from like Jamaica or from the Virgin Islands or from other kind of island nations, and they'll form a community because they have a shared culture. And that in that sense, there are absolutely black communities. But the way I hear the term misused a lot or just used in common media is there's the black community and there isn't just one. That's just, it's not true. There are different groups of people all over the country who are not going to live the same way. A black community in rural Christian Texas isn't going to have the same values as a black community in downtown New York. Like they're not going to be the same because they're not going to have the same culture. But it's unfortunate that a lot of people try to use the term the black community to kind of tell black people what they can and can't do and the opinions that they're not supposed to hold. And I think that's detrimental to a lot of people because it kind of keeps them in a box that they don't need to be in. Like it kind of goes back to that mental those mental barriers I mentioned earlier, that putting those in people's way is just, it's not helping their quality of life overall.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like you're describing the tension between individualism and collectivism.
Yes, I think that's what it comes down to a lot. I've always been an individual. I am me first above all else. Second, I am an American. And third, I happen to be a Black American. But a lot of people want to be seen as an identity. They want to belong to whether it's race or or gender or whatever. They want to have that label. And a lot of those labels seem to come with ideological prescriptions to a lot of people. Like uh, I'm going to quote the president. If you don't know if you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black. And I think that was a perfect example of what it means to kind of, if you want to hold that identity, then you have to have these ideological tenets. And I don't believe in that because I think people are individuals first and they should be free to be individuals.
Yeah, I agree. We do have a long road ahead of returning to the American values of individuality, freedom of speech, individual sovereignty. Um, I also wonder if on that road ahead, there will be new values that are born. Do you think that there's anything worth exploring that might be new to this country that could perhaps come from other cultures or other places outside of the US?
New values. That's something I actually hadn't thought of. I think there's definitely value that other cultures do have that America lacks. I think to look at, let's say, Hispanic cultures, because when I was growing up, my best friend, his family was from El Salvador, and they're very family oriented. They're very tight knit. They look out for each other, and I think that's something that is actually lacking in modern American culture. I'm not sure exactly when this shift happened. Because I remember when I was growing up, there were shows like The Proud Family, Family Matters, things that really kind of just showed how families function, and sometimes it would be dysfunctional, but it always come back to the idea that no matter what, family has your back and they'll be there for you. And now when I look at media, I don't really see any of that. I can't even name a family-oriented show that exists these days that kind of still promotes those values.
Hmm. Do you think you'll explore that in your book?
I think I might. I think
Cool.
it's a really good idea.
Yeah. Um, I'm also curious, well, I don't know if it's Marxism per se, but I will say like the far lefties, they often bring up like that the nuclear family is like no longer necessary and we should all just be like one happy village and take care of each other. Is there any merit to that?
I think there's a little bit of merit to that, but mostly no. And I say that because like Black Lives Matter organization, they had on their website for a while that one of their goals was the destruction of the nuclear family, but they got rid of it because they realized how many people dislike that idea. I think it's important to keep a kind of stable family unit just because I think it's the best way to raise children for like their their prosperity and to just kind of check their own behavior as they're growing up and to make sure they don't get too wild or radicalized one way or the other. I think there is benefit to having a community kind of look out for, I guess you could say, the children of the community. I think there's real value in that. Like when I was growing up, I could just run across the street to a different family and they knew who I was. They knew if I was in trouble, if I was doing something I shouldn't be doing, then they would know to let my mom know and just kind of keep children in line. I think that's a good thing, but I think it's misappropriated with Marxists in when they want like a village to raise a child, because I think it's going to end up being the state is going to raise your child. And the state is going to do things that's in the interest of the state and not in the best interest for the individual.
Do you think any of these people understand what they're doing?
Some of them. I think some people are deliberately malicious and they're out to convince people of things that are not true but sound good on the surface. But I think a lot of people are just caught up in the ideology that sounds good and they don't think about it too much deeper because if they do, they'll probably get kicked out of their group or their mob. So it just kind of keeps their collective keeps them ignorant together, kind of like a cult.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of like exactly like a cult. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Well, you have come such a long way. And I'm just grateful that we got a chance to connect today.
No, thank you very much for taking the time to interview me. I actually really enjoyed this conversation. Hopefully you'll be open to having more discussions in the future as because our culture is going to keep changing. Things are getting more tense, you could say, if you've been paying attention to a lot of the things in the media lately.
Oh, yeah.
Um, but I have a lot further to go. I'm going to hopefully have this book out by next year. I'm going to be working with a co-author in early 2022, and I'm gonna just keep doing my small part to try to reclaim American culture.
Excellent. And I'd love anyone who's listening to follow you online. I really appreciated your recent Instagram posts about, unfortunately, parents being accused of being domestic terrorists.
Oh yeah, that.
Yeah, do you want to talk about that for a second?
Sure. I think it's just amazing that for an entire year and a half, Portland had over 100 consecutive nights of violent rioting. We had people get shot, we had buildings burned down, and none of those people are arrested or called terrorists. But you have parents who are going to school board meetings saying, you will not teach my child to hate themselves or hate other racial groups of people. I will not have this, and then have the DOJ saying we're going to investigate these people for domestic terrorism. I think that's a damning statement of how far this ideology has permeated our government and the extents that they're willing to use to protect it. I think that's terrifying.
Mm, yeah. And where can people find you online?
Online, I am mostly on Gab and I'm also on Instagram at noble underscore stripes. I use Gab a little bit more just because it's easier. If people would like to support me directly, there is a Give Send Go set up, Give Send Go slash support David. But I'm also going to say support Project Veritas because they're one of the most important journalistic organizations we have, not only to America, but honestly to the Western world at this point. With that last, like the Pfizer expose that they're doing, like these aren't issues that just affect America. These are issues that are going to affect all of the countries that are dealing with these mandates over some controversial medical treatments that we are not able to agree on. But definitely support them. And that's where I am online, Gab and Instagram.
Okay, yeah, good to know. And what is one intention you're setting moving forward?
To build culture. And if I can change, I said this in my Veritas interview, if I can change 10 people's minds away from critical theory, then I feel like I've succeeded. I'm going to keep trying to change more, but if I can change 10 people, then hopefully they can change another 10 people, and we can just kind of create a snowball effect and really just kind of restore our culture to its proper form where it wants people to succeed as individuals and it doesn't want to hold them back based on group identity.
Yes, hopefully so. Thank you, David.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, let's stay in touch. Take care.
Take care. You have a good day.
Bye.